I didn't notice the door on the first day. That's important. If it had stood out immediately, if it had been locked, sealed, or out of place, I might have trusted my instincts and left. But it didn't. It blended in the way bad things often do. Same paint, same cheap handle, same hollow knock when you tapped it. Just another door in a cheap apartment I could barely afford after the divorce. One bedroom, one bathroom, a narrow kitchen that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals no matter how much I aired it out. The building itself was old but maintained, the kind of place where nobody asks questions as long as the rent clears. That suited me fine. The door was at the end of the short hallway, opposite the bathroom. I assumed it was a closet. I didn't open it until the third night. That was my first mistake. When I turned the handle and pulled, I expected resistance, or shelves, or darkness. Instead, the door opened easily, and kept opening. Beyond it wasn't a room. It was distance. A hallway stretched away from me, long and straight, its walls the same off-white as my apartment. The same cheap carpet, the same ceiling light fixtures spaced evenly apart. Too evenly. The hallway was longer than the apartment itself could physically allow. I remember standing there, staring, waiting for my eyes to adjust. Because that's what you do when something doesn't make sense. You assume your body is wrong before you assume the world is. I stepped forward and flicked the light switch just inside the doorway. The hallway lights came on one by one, but not instantly. There was a delay, a noticeable one. Like the electricity had to travel farther than it should. I closed the door and stood there for a long time, listening to my own breathing. When I opened it again, the hallway was gone. Just a shallow linen closet. Empty. Normal. I laughed then, a short, relieved sound. I told myself it was stress, fatigue, the residue of a life, collapsing and reforming into something smaller. I didn't open it again that night. Over the next few days, I avoided the door without consciously deciding to. My eyes slid past it. My feet didn't carry me near it. I slept badly and blamed the unfamiliar noises of the building, the pipes, the elevators, the distant footsteps that never quite sounded like they were going where they should. On the fifth night, I heard something from behind the door. Not a sound exactly. A delay. I turned on the hallway light, and the sound of the switch clicking reached my ears a fraction of a second later than it should have. That's when I knew it wasn't just in my head. I opened the door again. The hallway was back. Longer this time. I couldn't see the end. The light from my apartment spilled into it and died somewhere ahead, like it had been swallowed. I stepped just inside the threshold and clapped my hands. The echo came back late, not faint. Late. I closed the door with shaking hands. That night, I dreamed of standing at the end of a long corridor, calling my own name and waiting for the sound to return. It never did. I might have left then. I should have. But money has a way of making you rationalize things you shouldn't. And curiosity, real curiosity, not the fun kind, has weight. Once it settles in you, it presses until you move. A week after I first saw the hallway, I noticed something else. The apartment felt tighter, not smaller, just wrong. I bumped my elbow on the kitchen counter twice in one morning, misjudged the distance between the couch and the coffee table, reached for a mug and knocked it over instead. Little things, things you can explain away. That night, I opened the door again. The hallway was there, unchanged from before. I stepped inside and took exactly 3 steps forward. The air felt thicker the farther I went, not heavy, but resistant. Like pushing your hand through water without the wetness. I didn't feel afraid yet, just watched, measured. I stepped back into my apartment and closed the door. Immediately, the pressure in the room eased. That was when the fear started, because the apartment hadn't been reacting to the door. It had been reacting to me. I started paying attention to the other tenants. There weren't many. A woman across the hall who smoked on the fire stairs, a young guy downstairs who never made eye contact, and an older man in 3B named Harris. Harris walked carefully, not slowly, carefully, like the world might shift if he wasn't precise. I noticed bruises on him one morning, deep ones, around his ribs and hips. "Fall?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Something like that." A week later, Harris died. They said it was an accident. He'd been found crushed between the elevator doors, his body wedged at an angle that didn't make sense given the space. The maintenance report said mechanical failure, but the doors worked fine the next day. I stood in my hallway that night, staring at the door, and for the first time, I understood what it did. The door didn't lead somewhere. It adjusted you. I tested it again, carefully. I stepped farther than before, just until the apartment light behind me dimmed. When I came back, nothing looked different. But everything felt wrong. The sink was farther away than my arm expected. The light switch took effort to reach. I misjudged the height of the bed and nearly fell onto it instead of sitting. I checked myself in the mirror. I looked the same. That was the worst part, because I hadn't shrunk. The world had pulled away from me. Once you notice that, you start seeing it everywhere. Door frames feel hostile. Staircases feel steeper. Sidewalks feel wider. I watched another tenant, someone I didn't know well, get hurt in the most mundane way imaginable. She tripped. Not badly, not dramatically, but when she fell, her shoulder slammed into the wall at a distance that shouldn't have been possible. She screamed like something inside her had folded. She moved out 2 days later. I never saw her again. The door began opening on its own after that. Just a crack. Enough to let the hallway breathe into my apartment. The pressure would build if I closed it for too long. The apartment wanted equilibrium. It wanted me corrected. I tried to leave. That was my final mistake. The building's exit felt far, not farther in steps, farther in effort, like walking across an airport terminal that never quite reaches the gate. The street outside was worse. Crosswalks took too long. Cars passed at distances I couldn't judge. A passing cyclist nearly clipped me, and I realized, too late, that I hadn't been where I thought I was standing. The door had changed me permanently. Distance followed me now. That night, the hallway behind the door stretched longer than ever. The light from my apartment barely reached the threshold. I stood there, knowing what would happen if I went farther, knowing what would happen if I didn't. Because the world doesn't forgive mismatched things. It crushes them, folds them, erases them in accidents that no one questions. I stepped forward. The air resisted me, then accepted me. The hallway lights came on in sequence, slow and patient. I walked until the light behind me vanished. When I returned, if I returned, I knew I would be smaller, safer, more compatible. The door closed behind me on its own. And somewhere, far ahead, I felt the distance waiting to finish its work.